Final Stop Brasil, Chapter 33, Destructive Obsession, Internet Striptease. It was already dark when I awoke. For a moment, I needed to get my bearings. Then I remembered everything again, the whole nightmare. I was alone in the room. My eyes fell on the envelope, still there where I saw it last. When I checked, not a single note was missing. But where was Saydou? I basically knew he wouldn't have touched my money, but what if he was leaving me alone here? Saydou finally spoke the local language and could easily go underground here. I hastily looked around, but all his belongings were still there, to my relief. I washed myself and went down to the reception. Actually, I found Saydou, standing there, lost in his thoughts, at the window of the hall. Saydou, I addressed him gently. When he noticed me, he pointed outside. Look there, the prostitutes, all Africans. Disgusted by the sight of these women on the street, waiting for clients, he turned away. Let us go up. I followed him to the elevator. It was all so absurd. I didn't recognize Saydou anymore. He talked to me as if I was a stranger, his face like stone. He went straight to the bathroom and closed the door behind him. I didn't know what to do, how I should conduct myself. It was 11 p.m. and I wondered how this night was yet to be. But this question was answered a few minutes later. Saydou stepped out of the bathroom, freshly shaved, and demanded with an icy voice, "Pack your things, we go back." The tone in his voice left no valid objection. But with all due understanding, I protested, "Saydou, we have arrived only today. Please let us rest, at least this night, and drive back tomorrow. We have nothing further to do here, and we'll go now." It was almost like a threat, and Saydou glared at me with a scowling face. So what? I didn't want to argue with him now. Silently, I packed my things and was ready within minutes. We hadn't even unpacked a lot. With brief instructions, Saydou piloted me out of the garage and onto the streets until we were on the highway. From there it was all straight, and I drove in silence. As I turned on the music, Saydou shouted at me, "Turn it off! I don't want to hear any music." Silent, I drove through the night. This time, I found the border to Germany at once. 100 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 20 kilometers. Saydou, go to the back. We are close to the border. I'll stay here. My foot was on the brakes automatically. Saydou, please, don't be childish. We will find another solution, but now please go to the back. I don't care what is going to happen. I'm staying right here in front. I drove on slowly and sent shocked prayers to heaven. It helped. The border was open. We were back in Germany. I put down my foot on the acceleration with a sigh of relief. It was Sunday and no vacation time, so we could be back in Hamburg in about 5 hours. I furtively looked over at Saydou. What was going on in his head? Scowling, he stared straight ahead without saying a word. I tried to force him a conversation, but only got either no response or a short yes or no. Shortly before noon, we reached Hamburg. Still on the way, I called Kathy, explained why we were already back. "Wait, I'll give you Mark." The phone was passed. "Hello, I believe it is better if Michael will stay with us a little more. I'll be on my way and we meet at your house." The first time I saw Mark, in respect of me, concerned, but maybe it was because he was also a Muslim, even if not practicing. But maybe he was, in this situation, an understanding and sympathetic assistance, because I was overwhelmed with it. We had just entered the apartment as Mark also arrived. "Saydou, you must not take it so tragically. There are other possibilities. I know a lot of people who can help you." Now I saw Saydou smile again, but it was not genuine, as he answered Mark, "Perhaps there are other possibilities, but I must find it myself." Yet, while he said this, he began to take out his clothes he kept in my closet and packed them in his bag. Mark looked at him, just as incredulous as I was. "Saydou, you cannot simply leave me alone like this." I was crying, and Mark cried out, "Saydou, but Rita is not to blame." Saydou now had packed up his things, turned to me and said, now again with his usual soft voice, "No, Rita, you don't have no blame at all." He pushed a bundle of notes into my hand. "The money for the rental car. Adieu," grabbed his bag and left the apartment. This was too much for me. Screaming and crying, I broke down. Mark stayed for hours and spoke reassuringly to me. Mark, whom ironically I had never liked, was now the only one who stood by my side. Eventually I fell asleep. It was only later I learned Mark had stayed until late when Jana arrived. He was very concerned to leave me alone. Monday I reported sick, went to the doctor, got me sick leave for a week, and I had me prescribed sedatives and sleeping pills. I drove home, took one of the tranquilizers, and went to bed. In the afternoon, Kathy and Mark came to bring Michael back home. "Give him time, he will come back," Kathy tried to console me, but no one knew Saydou as well as I did. He really loved me, but he was a very proud man, too proud to return to ask me to marry him after all. He would never do it after I had told him I wouldn't marry him. On Wednesday, Mr. Weber, my lawyer, called me. "Where's Saydou? I tried to call him, but the phone seems to be off, and he doesn't call back. I must speak with him urgently." Almost apathetic, I asked, "Good or bad news?" Unfortunately, no good news. The appeal in the asylum process had been rejected. Therefore, he must come here urgently. Suddenly, I awoke from my apathy. "Mr. Weber, what does it mean exactly?" "This means he will receive an invitation to come to the Foreign Department during the next days. There, he will be deprived of his temporary residence permit and runs the risk of immediate deportation. At best, he will receive a toleration which usually has only 1 month's validity, but with the option to be extended. This could be virtually the case until the officials of the immigration find a cheap flight to the Ivory Coast." "But what can we do now?" "That's why I'm calling indeed. In any case, you should not go there alone. I will issue a certificate for you that you live in divorce and plan to marry Saydou. It will not make much of a difference, however. Important is, he is either with me or with you, not alone. Tell him this, please." Saydou's phone was, as the lawyer had already stated, off. Suddenly, I had a terrible thought. Maybe he had already gone to the Foreign Department, and I waited until 10 a.m. and then drove there, hoping it was not yet too late. Saydou was there. This time, however, there was no hugging or kissing. It was very painful for me to see him and to know this barrier was between us. "Saydou, I have come to give you a message from Mr. Weber." I explained to him Mr. Weber had informed me of and warned him not to go alone. "What difference does it make? 1 month, 2 months, alone, with a lawyer, with you? Allah will decide what happens to me." "Saydou, I'm begging you. Forget what I said. I will never let you down, never. And if you still want me, I will marry you." "Already forgot, Rita? You are still married." "Saydou, I will go with you to the Foreign Department, but please go and talk to Mr. Weber." I turned around and ran outside so he didn't see my tears. My real nightmare was just about to begin when I received my next payslip. Around this time, the payroll division ran the automatic annual national run of the tax equalization. Normally, It brought me every year a few extra marks. This year, though, I didn't expect anything, since I now belonged to the tax bracket of singles. But what I saw on my payroll gave me a shock. This I had never expected. The complete last year had been practically recalculated since I officially had separated from Geraldo. Now, under the bottom line, my net salary was negative. In other words, I had worked this last month for nothing and wouldn't get paid no salary during the following month. But this they couldn't do, could they? With my payslip, I entered Andrea's bureau. Andrea, this must be a mistake. I cannot work for months without pay. Andrea shook her head. Unfortunately, this is not a mistake, Rita. You changed your tax class too late. Unlike your husband, who changed in time, he is now better off than before. I'm sorry. I was stunned. 4 months without a salary. How should I and Michael survive? This was the result of a socially hostile politics of the CDU. Millions had been pumped into the ex-GDR, but here they pulled away the ground under people's feet. I desperately searched a solution. Take another job? I could forget about it, because after all, the new laws, all jobs were taxed, even working in a bar. Clandestine work was extremely controlled and punished, and therefore hard to find. The golden days were over. Of course, there were still possibilities, for example as a prostitute, but this I would never, ever be able to do. 1 month Michael and I could have lived by the overdraft of my account, but then it was finished. Of this I didn't need to fool myself. This was now the price I paid for helping Geraldo. At the foreign department, I did everything to convince the clerk I intended to marry Saydou once I was divorced. The man was not only friendly, but also very understanding. He didn't give Saydou only 1 month, but 3 months delay. Outside, Saydou was very euphoric. Apparently, he had overcome the story with the passport. Slowly he tried to approach me again, called me several times, but when he finally appeared at my home, it ended in controversy. I held against him that he had let me down in a very lousy way, but that I was a bundle of nerves who could only exist with sedatives and sleeping pills, in addition to antidepressants, and that financially the water was up to my neck. I wouldn't let him know. Some time later, I let him invite me to a cafe. Rita, what's wrong with you? Are you sick? I shook my head and looked into his eyes. How much I loved Saydou, but now I was fighting for survival, and I had to do it alone. Thierry, do you believe we still have a chance? You want to know if I marry you? Sure, I promised you, didn't I? I drank my coffee and apologized. I had something to do. Every day I studied the newspapers and looked for any solution to my problem, and on this day it appeared. I had found it in a very large ad. Wanted, Internet models, female, any age, on independent base. I immediately called the number. The managing director didn't really want to explain anything about the job on the phone and asked me to come over personally. The office and the studios were in a backyard, half-hour drive outside of Hamburg. When I entered the office, the general manager eyed me interested. You are? Rita, we have phoned 2 hours ago. He offered me a chair, and when I sat down, my skirt slid up. Perky, I ignored it and threw my long hair to the back. Either way, I had to have this job. Accountancy, I knew enough to cheat the tax office as independent worker. Those politicians didn't want it otherwise. What I had to do in this job, however, I had no idea yet. The general manager explained it to me and showed me my future working place. There were a number of studios set up in which 2 women, one on each side, performed a striptease in front of the cameras. Invisible for the cameras, in the middle of the room at the wall were 2 tables with PCs, which were occupied with 2 women who diligently typed, then read again the text appearing on the monitor, and the two strippers who moved slowly and sensually in front of the cameras got instructions of these two women what to do next, or what the online visitor wrote. "Why do the models have microphones attached to the ear?" I asked, interested. "They have no function. They are a make-believe for the online visitors. He is alone with the model and talks to her, and she is dictating what appears on his monitor. What the visitor sees on his screen is written, of course, by the two ladies. This, however, the customer doesn't know. Someone else writes the text. Every studio was set up differently and possessed a completely different ambience. One half was with bodybuilding appliances, the other just only having a huge rudder chair, and all was held in discreet lighting. Yet another studio was equipped with a cozy couch and a small table in front, one with a huge bed and playful pillows. The models all welcomed me very nice, but I was not so sure whether I could really do this. "When can you start, or when do you want to start?" "Tomorrow, but please take into account I can do only the evening or night shift, since I'm still working during the day." The general manager was very interested in it. I accepted the job, and after I explained to him my plight, he offered me to pay my salary the first 2 months underhand, but after this time I would have to get me a business license. 3,000 marks base salary plus percentage per minute the customer remained online, and if I was willing to do telephone sex as well, this would also bring another big money, but only if I really wanted to, because it wasn't the thing for everyone. Since it was already very late, unfortunately, I couldn't prepare Michael that our lives would change extremely from now on. But Kathy I still called the same night, asking her to pick up Michael from the daycare center the next day, and explain to her what I would do from now on. "What are you going to do? Internet striptease?" Kathy was shocked, but I explained to her I had no choice. The next day I left the company as soon as possible, raced home, showered, put my makeup, coiffed my hair, and looked for sexy nightlife clothes from the closet. Dressed finished, I drove to the studios. On the way, I asked myself again and again, can I really do this? I had to. When I arrived, I was welcomed by Daike, the owner of the company. "Oh yes, there's our new one. You are very pretty. The first thing we do now is to shoot a nice photo of you we will put on the website so the customers know you are existing. And then we have to think of an artist name for you. You sure don't want to work under your real name, right? How about Kim? I think the name fits you." I like the name Kim. Daike brought a suitcase filled with lots of lingerie and other sexy clothes. "Pick something out of this. For the next 2 months I equip you. Then you must buy your own clothes for work, but you can reduce everything from the tax. Put on one of the pieces and then I take the photo, okay? Afterwards we'll have a toast to your start. This is the custom here. When someone starts new, I throw a round of gin, red, creamy and champagne." I chose a white sexy body cut out to the navel, but otherwise everything was covered. On the French bed, Daike shot 3 photos of me with his digital camera. I was more than satisfied with the result. Enlarged on the monitor, he commented, "Kim, you look on these photos like a sweet and shy little girl. The customers will go for it, for sure. Let's drink a toast, and then you start there on the sofa. Relax and do what your opposite is doing. You make it." The Crimean champagne was very tasty and relaxed me a little. From now on, my abstinence was forgotten, just as the minimal smoking. Daike explained to me the remote for the camera. I steered all the settings myself with. I initially watched what my opposite was doing. My stomach cramped up at the thought. Somewhere out there, men were sitting in front of the monitors and possibly masturbating by our side. It reminded me of the peep show on the Reeperbahn I visited once with Jude. This was nothing different, just more modern. Never would I have dreamt to sink so low myself one day. Defiantly I thought, however, this was not my will, but I owed this to the shit German government. Alone with a child, they left you nothing more to survive. Oh, how I hated this country. This hypocritical Christian politics wanted to force people back to marriage, but the men whom I loved I could not marry because the laws of this country made a divorce so difficult that Geraldo could pass through with his hardship for years, while Saydou was threatened with deportation. How long had Saydou earned his money yet by honest work with his Chinese employer, but illegal? Saydou would never do criminal things, and hated what other Africans did. Why was he not given a chance in this country in form of a work and residence permit, as in all other European neighboring countries? No, they said they would take the jobs away from the Germans. The paradox, however, was that people like Robert or Saydou were doing such hard work it was too hard for the Germans, and therefore nobody wanted these jobs, and certainly not for the same wages the Africans were paid by the employer. Kim, you have visitors on your side. I was startled from my thoughts. Irritated, I turned the camera so that only my arm was visible. I fought hard with the remote control to pan the camera back the other way when the woman at the PC called out to me, "Kim, adjust the camera. The visitors already asked if they can see anything more from you." Grimly, I pressed the buttons as the camera suddenly swung and showed exactly this grim face and hands holding convulsively the remote control. This was not very erotic. Stiff and tense, I started to take off my clothes, but couldn't open my bra and fumbled helplessly with my hands around the back. My stockings sort of got caught somehow, and it all ended in a fiasco. As the woman at the PC also passed me now the malicious remarks from the internet users, I was close to tears and about to throw the towel. But I had to have this job, no matter how. The model on the other side, which up to now not had said anything, began, "We all have started like this. We are all no professional strippers. You have far too much clothes on. Make it easier for yourself by wearing less. And don't care about it, particularly what these stupid wankers are writing. But the more clothes I take off, the longer the customers stay online or not," I asked uncertainly. "Nonsense. They just want to see tits and ass. Even better for them to be turned on when you're wearing nothing." First off, I was very confused. But when I took my clothes at least 50 times half off and then put them back on again, since the online visitors looked at my side briefly to disappear again, I knew I had to start it differently. Listless and tired, I did my work in the office every day and asked myself why I was still doing this shit here at all. Who at all likes to work for nothing? Towards my colleagues I was getting ever more monosyllabic. Only if some regular customers from the big supermarkets insisted on making their orders with me, I awoke from my lethargy and came into form. One daily customer made his order with me, and the conversation expanded every day a little more and became sometimes very private. We had already started to call each other by our first names, which in other countries is indeed quite normal, but in the oh-so-stuffy German business life completely unthinkable. The customer was totally carried away by my sexy voice and was flirting hell-bent with me. Normally, we knew the clients only by phone. Our Salesforce chief visited the customers personally, and it dissolved almost a scandal when my regular customer appeared one day personally. The field staff went to meet him, worried this visit was because of a complaint. He, however, explained he wanted to meet personally this fascinating voice, nothing else. So I was called officially away to meet with the customer in the reunion room to take coffee with him, which the typist of the head served us. Then I perfectly shaved presented him to the colleagues. "You look just like your voice sounds," he whispered to me. The men belonged to the small group of German men arousing erotic desires in me, and the feeling was mutual. However, completely contrary to his charisma, he was one of the few men who knew their effect on women, yet were faithful to their wives. As one afternoon I followed his invitation for coffee, he asked me, "Do you actually have an idea what effect you have on men? Just to hear your voice, something moves me, but to see you, I can't think of nothing more than to sleep with you. I'm crazy about you, but whether you believe it or not, I'm a faithful husband and will remain so." He should not remain the only one. I let men invite me more often, and my self-confidence grew and grew. After only 4 weeks, I was one of the best horses in Dyker's stable. I vowed to do the job, and like everything in my life, I did something perfect or not at all. Long since, I developed my own style to dress, to move, and did what I could do best, dance. I worked only in the lingerie I bought myself from sex shops, or sometimes provided by Dyker. As maximum, I used the negligee on top of it, nothing more. Yes, I started to have fun, knowing I dominated thousands of men and made them crazy with lust. Sometimes Dyker came rushing up the stairs from the ground floor, where he sat in front of the server, supervising the technical side and the monitors, and exclaimed, "Kim, your site is about to crash. There are too many visitors." The dancing in erotic and sensual movements was in my blood. My passionate and seductive expression I had rehearsed to the smallest detail before the camera. At night or in the mornings during the weekend, I led the dialogues with the visitors myself. I made the writer read to me all the writing by the visitors, and responded to individual wishes. Ushi, our new writer, had her hands full in order to write, read, pass on what the visitors wrote, to write then again what I instructed. If English writing guests were online, I took the wireless keyboard into my hands, wrote and moved again to any positions. My inhibitions were dropped completely to zero. Telephone sex? Absolutely no problem for me. Whenever Dyker came with new creations of lingerie, he liked to try them out on me. We then worked together often on the ground floor, next to the server room, in a studio, with a very discreet light, where I sprawled on a giant couch in a catsuit or a sexy mini-dress with 2 openings for the breasts. While he himself wrote, he then used to call out enthusiastic again and again, "Yes, Kim, that's it. The visitors are going crazy. You're super. You do it great, Kim," or similar. More and more, I involved myself in this world and identified myself emotionally with it. After 6 weeks, I asked Kathy to get a business license and filed a notice of termination to my employer. My boss looked at me incredulously. "You are one of our best forces. Why do you want to leave us? Did you find a better position?" "No, with this tax policy, I can no longer survive as a single parent with 1 child as an employee. I start my own business." My boss was very upset when she heard for the first time what had happened with my tax bracket after the change. Of course, I lied in relation of the industry. I did my own business. She wished me good luck. "If you change your mind, the door is always open for you." During this time, Kathy and I were closer than before, if one could call it so. I allowed no one to approach me emotionally anymore. Kathy and Mark had long since realized I paid a very high price for the money I earned, and I was about to sell my soul. Mark knew I no longer just worked for the money, 7 days a week, almost day and night, but I escaped just before the reality in Saydou, a love story that was far from finished. The highest price, though, paid Michael, who hadn't lost only Saydou, but also now the person who loved him most, ever loving and protective, and he could always count on me. Our daily encounters at Kathy's place were limited to a maximum of half an hour. It cut me to the heart when he asked sadly, "Mom, why do you have to work so much all the time?" To compensate the lack of time and to soothe my guilty conscience, I bought him everything he wanted and gave him more than generous allowance. But all of this, and also Cassie, who tried as well as possible to replace me, didn't help to stop the deep depression Michael slipped into more and more. Initially, he was always quiet and introspective. He began chewing on his nails, but not just as a bad habit. How many children have it? No. He chewed his nails down to nothing, and all the nail beds were inflamed, which must have caused him great pain. Even Mark, who tried hard at those times and took the two boys, Marcus and Michael, often with him in the car, went with them somewhere, passed time playing football with them, invited them to McDonald's or KFC. Kathy and Alex, most of all me, we watched helpless as Michael silently suffered. So I was glad when my boss let me out earlier of the employment contract, now knowing I had already incidentally started otherwise, and being on the verge of exhaustion, and yet not earned one single mark in the company. On my last day, my colleagues had organized to my honor a small farewell party, and gave me some nice gifts as memory. Even my favorite client had money collected throughout his beverage market, and I received a beautiful large crystal fruit bowl filled with exotic fruits. Wistful, I unloaded the things at Kathy's house, where we were now more present than staying at home. At least my work schedule was again slightly reduced. Even I worked every day up to 12 hours in layers, which were between 10 and 10 in the evening, 12 to midnight, or 2 p.m. until 2 a.m. in the morning. Sometimes from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. Few weekends I took off to do something with Michael, but at night when he slept, I could feel the pain which would simply not lessen the longing for Saydou, the only person in my life who really loved me. With him, I lost all grip, and it tormented me so much I could hardly stand it. I began to visit the Chocolate City again, hoping to meet him there. Roland was very happy to see me and showered me with compliments. On the dance floor, I was quickly surrounded by many men, but none of them exerted the slightest attraction for me. I sat down with Roland at the bar, him asking me, "What is the matter with you and your boyfriend? Did you fight, or did you separate?" Every Saturday he comes alone, but instead of dancing all night, like he used to, he only hangs around. He looks so sad. Before I could answer at all, Saydou actually entered the disco. Spellbound, I watched as he came slowly to the bar. My heart beat wildly, just like the first time I saw him. Saydou looked at Roland and greeted him with a nod. Me he ignored. "Oh, I think you two have to have a good talk with each other, right? I have work to do in the office. See you later," said Roland and was gone. I wasn't alone for a long time. Some Africans sat next to me and started talking to me. Without taking any notice of them, I got off the bar stool and headed, like hypnotized, towards Saydou. "Saydou, I haven't seen you a long time." Saydou looked at me with ice-cold glance. "Because you don't want to see me. Do you know how many times I stood outside your door and also called on the phone? Every time you sent Yana to the phone or to the door, telling me every time you're not at home. Why are you doing this? Why don't you tell me in the face you don't want to see me? Do you have someone else?" I grabbed his hand. "Someone else than you? Do you really believe this? Let us dance. I will explain you everything." For a moment he looked into my eyes, and I could see his face lit up. The ice had broken, and he once again looked at me with all his love in his eyes. He pulled me to the dance floor, where we danced closely, our bodies grinding together, while his hands were sliding over my body. I turned around and danced with my back to him. I pulled his head down to me and whispered, "Let's go, right now." We hardly sat in the car as we attacked each other like two wild animals. Saydou's hands were everywhere, while he kissed me with such hardness I had never known on him before. I could hardly stand the desire I felt. I pushed him off with gentle pressure. While I drove, I explained I actually was never at home because I was working. Saydou doubtfully asked, "In the evening and at night?" "Yes, Saydou, daytime, evening and nighttime." I had a big problem and had to change jobs, but my problem is solved. So I came to the disco to see you. Still suspicious, he wanted to know, "What job is this you're working at night?" "I work as a model for lingerie. I have photos shot of me. The photos are immediately placed on the internet, and thus the company is not bound on any time. This is why they are working 24 hours a day." A more stupid story I could have hardly thought up, but Saydou swallowed it. He probably would have believed everything this moment. His thoughts were exactly where mine were, as fast as possible into bed. When we finally walked from this for hours last in ecstasy, and drank coffee, to which I pleasurably smoked a cigarette without taking Saydou into consideration, he sat down beside me, shook his head and just asked, "What has just happened to us? Why can't we let go of each other? I love you, and I'm crazy to make amour with you. But this here is sick. It is not normal. I want to marry you and live with you, but I must think of me too. How serious are you about getting married with me?" "You still don't know it, Saydou. But what do you do to get finally divorced?" "Saydou, I can't do anything. It is entirely up to Geraldo." Saydou didn't believe me. This was now clear to me, and I knew if something would not happen very soon, I would lose him forever. "Do you have another woman?" I asked him. "I will not lie to you. I was together briefly with another woman. But what can I do? I love you and cannot forget you. You're the only woman with whom I'm happy." For a short time things returned almost how they used to be, except I pushed up my adrenaline at work, came home late at night with lingerie to bind Saydou sexually to me with new ideas that fascinated him. However, the next time we went to the foreign department, another clerk was there looking at Saydou's file, stating that still nothing had changed about our situation, and decided to give Saydou only 1 more month delay, with the comment, "By then we surely at least have the bands ordered." Saydou was unhappy and even suffered of nightmares sometimes. One morning I came home from work and watched him restlessly moving in bed and speaking words I didn't understand. I gently touched him when he suddenly jumped up, grabbed me, crashed on me with a scream, his hands covering my neck, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe anymore and drummed in panic with my hands against his chest as he finally came to consciousness and realized what he had done. Immediately he pulled me into his arms and murmured, "Sorry, forgive me. I didn't mean to hurt you." Hurt me? Without wanting it, he could have easily killed me. I was unhappy because our time was running up, and Michael was even unhappier because he couldn't understand this back and forth between Saydou and me. The tension in the air was becoming almost impossible to bear. Sometimes it unloaded in a noisy quarrel. My fear Saydou would seek another woman to marry was unbearable. One Saturday he promised to wait for me until I came home from work. My shift was from 2 p.m. until 2 o'clock in the morning. I came home and found the front door locked, with Michael alone in the apartment. How could Saydou do this? It was irresponsible not only to leave Michael behind, but in case of fire or who knows what, to take the opportunity of him to escape from the apartment. Enraged, I raced to the Chocolate City, where I saw Saydou dancing for the first time with another woman. I paved my way towards him and yelled at him, "Trente miserable!" In the middle of the dance floor, we were facing each other like two enemies, until he finally left furiously the disco. For weeks I didn't see him and fell back into my old depression. To forget, I drank, sometimes too much, even though I long since had started again taking the antidepressants. It numbed my pain. When I couldn't take it no longer, I called and begged him to come back to me. "It's too late, Rita. I'm with another woman." Sobbing, I stammered into the phone, "Saydou, you can't do this to me." That he indeed could, I heard by the woman's voice in the background. Pills, alcohol, and too many cigarettes were still not enough to numb my pain. With my colleagues, and now a new colleague, Sven, I started smoking cannabis more frequently. To fill the emptiness in me, I allowed myself to some one-night stands, after I just simply felt disgusted. Imagining Saydou together with another woman almost drove me crazy. Again and again, I humiliated myself and called him. If he was with his woman, his voice was ice cold. "Stop calling me, leave me alone." But if I caught him alone, the talks were quite differently. "Mon petit, I miss you too, but it's too late for us. I have to get married." I suffered agony and was blind for everything around me, when Alex one day took me to the side. "Rita, for God's sake, wake up and take a good look closely at your son. He suffers the same, if not more than you. Just go and look in his face. Do you know what impression I have? In Michael's opinion, the whole life is shit. I wouldn't be surprised if he's going to do some nonsense. Do something before it's too late." I called Michael to me and actually saw how unhappy he looked. I took him in my arms, pressed him to me and asked him, "Michael, what's the matter with you?" "Nothing," even though my conversation with Alex had sparked a dull feeling in me, a somber premonition. I shut my eyes. Instead, I allowed Sven, my colleague, who wrote for me at night, to comfort me. Sven was in about the same situation as me, but with the difference that he was gay. His relationship with Thomas was also about to go in fractions. During our work, we talked about our problems, and Sven understood better than anyone that I simply couldn't let go. Soon we became good friends, and Sven somehow took for a while the place of Amir. He was the shoulder to lean on, the ear, listening, and he freed me from my deep sadness at times with his wit and humor. At work we were a super team. As a trained makeup artist, he took care of my appearance, treated my hair with volume product, so I had full hair, which made me even more attractive. My hair ends he would cut regularly. He owned the sensitiveness of what the online guests wished, wrote funny or erotic text, and sometimes I just needed to lay on the bed, roll playfully in the silk sheets, throw my long full hair back over my shoulder, or spreading it over the pillow with a tempting look at the camera. The rest Sven would do at the PC. He did my makeup in a way that it was erotic but not cheap. It seemed that many guests just simply wanted to look at me and talk. Time and time again, I was drawn to the Chocolate City, always hoping to find Saydou there. Actually, I met him, and it struck between us like a flash. We left the disco together and made love immediately inside the car, because Saydou refused now to come to my apartment. "You can't do without me. No matter what you do, you still love me. This I know," I provoked him, whereupon he nearly crashed on me and loved me with an almost angry ferocity. Nothing could stop us anymore, not even in his room, which he now shared with two other Africans. One Saturday night, I didn't meet Saydou in the Chocolate City, and I was crazy about the idea he was with another woman again. I had to have certainty, and drove to the asylum home, knocked on the door, and to my relief, it was Saydou who opened it. It was totally clear to me he didn't spend much time with the other woman, apparently just enough to convince her to marry him. This made it somewhat easier for me. "Rita, what do you want? I'm not alone, and we've already been asleep. I've missed you so much, ma chérie. Reluctantly, he let me enter. I wore a new dress in black lace, which showed more than covered of my body, with slits on each side, showing my legs a great deal. Saydou's look at the dress told me everything. He lay back in bed and guessed it. I should sit with him. I truthfully told him I had changed the lawyer to enforce the divorce as quickly as possible. Are you coming back to me if I'm divorced? Oh, chérie, I don't know. Not now. I will not allow losing you to another woman, I sobbed. Saydou kissed away my tears and kissed me everywhere in the face. Je t'aime, Rita. I only love you, but I can't stay with you. We were desperately clinging to each other, and he still kissed me tenderly. Don't you think at all about Michael, who loves you and misses you very much? I made a new attempt. I love Michael, like he's my own son, and if I would have the choice, I would never leave you both. He stood up to prepare coffee for us. The other two men still stared at me, as if I was from outer space. After the four of us drank coffee together, just as nothing ever happened, I made myself ready to go. Saydou asked me not to repeat this again, and I didn't, at least for a while.